What is happening, people? Welcome back. Today, I'm delighted to say I've got an exclusive interview with the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust, and I'm joined by two fantastic people. Firstly, Rachel, how are you? And talk to people a little bit about yourself and your role.
Hi, Harry. Yes, I'm delighted to meet you, delighted to be here for the first time. So I'm Rachel Martin, and I've been on the trust, the Supporters Trust, actually for about 10 years, believe it or not. I had dark hair and had to show my birth certificate to buy a drink when I joined, but here we go. This is what 10 years on the trust does for you. I've thoroughly enjoyed the role. It's a really important role because it's a sort of official conduit between fans and the club. We have a sort of a formal arrangement with them. So we have a memorandum of understanding, which means that we meet with directors at the club 3 times a year, and those are set in stone and we can report back on them. But we also work with the club on a daily basis on loads and loads of issues, big ones, small ones, ones that affect everybody and ones that affect one person. So, we really try to make sure that the club hold fans at the heart of all the decisions that they make. As well as being on the trust, I am, along with my colleague Steve Cavalier, on the fan advisory board, and that's quite different because that is an internal board of the club. So we have access to all sorts of things, and we have lots of sway with the club, but that's through a different capacity, and that's with a range of other people from different organisations who've been elected.
Thank you, Rachel, firstly for joining me, but also for that key bit of background there. Really important role, and I think the Supporters Trust, that what they do as well, incredibly important. So thank you for your time. And Andy, thank you very much for coming on as well. Again, same questions. Hope you're keeping well. And would you like to tell people a little bit about yourself and your role too?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, first of all, thanks for the invite. It's great to come on, and I think really keen to talk some of the things that the trust is doing, and wider Tottenham as well on the podcast. So much more recent in terms of joining the trust than Rachel. I joined about 18 months ago now, and I'd kind of followed the trust for the past, I'd say 5-10 years or so, and was always really interested in the connection they had with the club, reading the minutes of meetings that they had and really understanding, getting behind what you read in the news to really understand what the club was saying about certain issues. So I kind of followed it in the background, but never thought about, joining or getting involved. First you didn't really know the process and, wasn't sure how you did that. And then met Rachel and she suggested I come along to one of the meetings and kind of went from there. And I'm really excited. It's been a really interesting kind of 18 months. I think we've only had 2 managers, which in 18 months is actually not too bad for Spurs. But I've followed Spurs since the 80s. I think, the 86-87 team was probably my first really good memory of Spurs as a really competitive team. I kind of missed out on the early 80s Cup glory, but that team was brilliant. And then, through the doldrums of the 90s and, I suppose up to the sort of Harry and then Poch era was, coming full circle back to an exciting attacking team. So being a long time Spurs supporter, but, being on the trust now to be able to sort of, I suppose, help fans and help the voice of fans as well with the club, is really exciting for me. And, it's a real eye opener to some of the things that are going on in the background.
Great stuff. Thank you, Andy, as well. Appreciate you both coming on. Should be a good one. For those that listen on YouTube, please like, subscribe if you're new. If you're listening via audio, so your podcast platform, please drop us a follow and a 5-star review. And let us know as well where you're listening from. Rachel, can I start with you? What is the remit of the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust?
Yeah, a really good question. So our remit covers a lot of areas, but there are very clear areas that it does not cover. So we are basically putting the fan perspective and consulting with the club on a range of issues. And this is formally constituted. We're part of what's called the Football Supporters Association. So that means that we are a democratic formally constituted organisation. We have an annual general meeting. We have a membership organisation. So we're representing our members, but we're also obviously wanting to represent the views of all Spurs fans. So the particular areas that we cover, and the vast majority of our work, is around ticketing and access to games. So we are involved in negotiating the prices of tickets, season tickets, general admission tickets, the concession policy. We, obviously get consulted about whether there's going to be an increase, and we will argue very strongly for what we feel is right and fair. We also cover heritage items. So that means you might, I don't know if you remember, Harry, but there was a time when there was a couple of football clubs were actually trying to change their colours and their crests because they'd been bought by foreign owners who didn't get the history of the club and didn't care about the history of the club. They just wanted their branding to sort of come into that. So we would have a formal way of being able to pretty much stop anything like that happening, actually. But we also cover areas like under heritage, things like statues. We are really keen on having some statues, and we are made of players, obviously, and managers. We are making headway with that. So, for example, we were involved through the Trust and the Fan Advisory Board with getting the Bill Nicholson gates reinstalled. And I hope everyone's been to see those, because they are beautiful and they're really iconic part of our history. So that they are well worth a view. They're round by the ticket office. And that's a temporary place because of all the building works going on. But it's as good a place as we could find as any. But we're also, we commissioned, for example, the Ledley King mural that everyone loves. That was the Trust that did that, not the club. Well, the club had a tiny bit of involvement, but we commissioned Muir Walls to do it. And we're hoping for some imminent news of work that we've been doing with the club on a future mural as well. So all those sort of areas like, colours, crests, and such like. So even when they just tweaked the crest recently, we were consulted on that. And a lot of community work as well. So we work with the Tottenham Hotspur Foundation, with the Antwerp Arms and other sort of community initiatives, the food banks. We do lots of work and charity fundraising for those. And basically, it's anything that's off pitch. They are not interested on whether we think that Matisse Tell should have been included in the Champions League squad. Our opinion is completely irrelevant, as it should be. There are hundreds of views available, and ours is no more relevant than anyone else's. But one thing we have done recently is we've created a survey on 5 key principles that we believe all owners, any owner, the current owner or any future owners, should adhere to. And the club have completely endorsed those 5 principles. And they cover, there are actually some on-pitch matters there. Basically, it's about all wanting the same thing, about investing to win, and, investing in the players that you need in order to do that. But it's also about leading with integrity. So there's a lot of issues, as well as individual case study.
Rachel, really appreciate that. I think that was really quite eye-opening and really useful. So really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. Andy, can I come to you? I mean, Rachel's spoken there about engaging with the club. I mean, what's the kind of experience with engaging with the club? How does it happen? And do you find that maybe an easy thing or more of a difficult thing? Because often fans want to know what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah. So we have 3 formal meetings with the club a year. And I can only speak on kind of recently, because obviously Rachel's been involved for a lot longer than I have. But I think, certainly with Vinay coming in, the intention is that they're very close engagement with us. Vinay is committed to attending all of our meetings that we have with the club, which hasn't always been the case in the past, although I do think the previous kind of regime, if we want to call it that, was pretty good at engaging with the supporters club as well. With the trust as well. But I do think that Vinay did put fan engagement quite high on his agenda at Arsenal, and we've been told that by should we call them friends from that club down the road. And I think he does see it as important. We met up with him a couple of months ago on a Zoom meeting, and he was very positive in engaging with us, wanted to hear what we had to say, was interested in some of the insights from our surveys. And he made all the right noises. I mean, obviously it's very early in his sort of tenure and he's got a lot to deal with. So we'll see how it works down the road. And, I think the start of the season, just having won a trophy, new manager, the mood is relatively positive, but we know that can quickly change as results change or, other things come to play. And I think, maybe we're already seeing the start of that with some of the pricing around Champions League tickets that, once fans get more unhappy, then the club gets more under pressure, and then we'll see how the engagement continues from there. But I would say, with the kind of the new regime that's in place, we've had good engagement, and they're wanting to engage with us going forward. But as Rachel said, we've got a clear remit about things that we can talk about and discuss with them, and that they want to hear from us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Could I just jump in there as well?
Of course.
There's a couple of things that sort of we've seen straight away. For example, we have been asking for a very long time for senior people at the club to speak out publicly to the fan base on a regular basis on things that matter, things that they are responsible for. So, for example, when we had the European Super League debacle, it was left to Ryan Mason, the stand-in manager, at a press conference to try and explain why the club had joined the Super League, which is completely inappropriate. That's got nothing to do with him. And people are hiding, obviously behind him when all that debacle was going on. But you'll have seen straight away that we've heard from Vinay many times publicly. He is out with the fans. When they were in Monaco, he was out there on the streets with fans. Johan Langer is communicating the interview they did with Thomas Frank when he first joined. I think we can see a shift. And the other thing is the fan forum. It used to be that there was one sort of 1 year, and then there wasn't one for 3 years, and then there was another one, except we're not really sure when it's going to happen. Now there is a firm commitment to do them every year at the beginning of the season. And the one that we had this year, which I hope everyone has seen, it's on YouTube, was particularly unstage managed. So there were loads of questions from the floor, and you could tell they were not stage managed, because a lot of them were things the club didn't really want asked, but about ticket pricing and things like that. But it was really good, and the whole event was broadcast. It wasn't chopped and edited out or anything like that. So that's two things that we've seen straight away, where they've listened and they've acted on what we've asked them. Loads more things that we want to hear from them, and we want them to do. But it's a good start, I think.
Appreciate that. Thank you, both of you. Andy, coming back to you, I mean, it's fair to say, the Supporters Trust have received criticism from fans in the past, in particular, as we see mainly on social media. Of course, people have the opportunity to air their views, and the criticism's often been over not being maybe strong enough or bold enough in holding the club to account. That's just how they feel, fans, particularly when Levy was chairman. I really noticed that there was a lot of questions on what the Supporters Trust doing, and of course, people don't know, like I said earlier, what goes on behind the scenes. So it's easy, isn't it, if you think, the club, we're annoyed with them about that. Hang on a minute, let's put two and two together. What the Supporters Trust doing? So, Andy, for you, do you think that criticism was fair at the time? Is it fair now? And what would you say to those that aren't sure about, whether the Supporters Trust actually do a good job or not?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's always a difficult one when you're dealing with football. It's such an emotive issue. For some people, it's the most emotive issue in their life. So you're going to expect that people are going to have vastly different views. And it's a bit like Rachel said before about, whether Tell should be in the Champions League squad. You'll probably get, not just the 2 views in or out, but you'll get another 20 views, or maybe, or, it depends on what players are available. So, and that's just dealing with player selection. When it comes to kind of the ownership of the club and the direction that the club wants to take, you can sit either side of people who've got very different views. And I think we saw that when, Daniel Levy stepped down. There was some people who piled in and said, oh, it's been overdue and it's, about time. But there's also other people who recognised, the work that he'd done, in terms of, putting Spurs on the map, I suppose, and, the new stadium, training ground and things like that. So you do get very polarised views. And I think, like, everyone on the trust board, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but recognises that's part and parcel of being involved with the trust and taking campaigns forward, that people are going to feel, you didn't go far enough, or, maybe, even with our current campaign that we've just launched, some people feel like, well, maybe now's not the right time, or everything's fine. Whereas others will feel, no, we need to go much further. And, it's something that's really important to them. So, you're going to get those voices that come in and say, the trust is not doing enough. What we have to do as well is not just, take what is maybe the loudest part of the Spurs fan group, but actually take the cross section of our members and also general fan sentiment, and then take that forward to the club, because we feel that best represents really where fans want to see change and where, we feel we can influence the club. So, that potentially people would feel that waters down what we go with. And, definitely the discussions we have are not about that, but we need to present things in the way that we feel that we can get change and we can influence things. For example, let's take something on the TV broadcasting deal. There's loads of fan unrest around, the way that sort of the broadcasters dictate the schedule. But the reality is, although fan groups campaign on it, and we're part of FSA campaigns around that, there's commercial, sort of imperatives that drive how football works these days. And, we wouldn't have the Premier League as it was today without, what broadcasters doing what they're doing. So we have to think about how we can campaign in the best way around that, rather than just saying broadcasters are ruining football, get rid of them, which isn't necessarily a solution. Same as, Daniel Levy doesn't do anything good for Spurs, he needs to step down. Well, it's kind of difficult when he owns the club to do that. So, we have to think about maintaining the engagement with a club. We are independent, but we need to maintain engagement. So we need to go to them with practical, kind of suggestions or campaigns for them to take on board. But we also need to think about what the broader fan base wants, not just the loudest sometimes.
That's very important. I think that's really interesting. Go on, Rachel.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I completely agree, Andy. I was interested, you recognised that the criticism is on social media. We actually get a huge inbox, we get loads and loads of emails, and people email often with casework and things, but very much also saying, well done, lads, keep it going. We really appreciate what you're doing. But I think they don't want to get involved in a conversation on social media, where if they say that, someone else will come, they're worried that someone else will come back and say the opposite. So we know that that's one way we know that we're, meeting the needs of a lot of people. But we also do a lot of surveys. Well, it's an big annual survey. And for years, the by far the overriding view was ENIC and Levy do a very good job off the pitch. They need to do a better job on the pitch. But there wasn't an appetite for new owners. Of course, we don't have new owners. We've got a new leadership structure at the club. But we had a Meet the Spurs journalist event, and Dan Kilpatrick from the Standard at the time, he's the Athletic now, asked everybody, and you could see he was absolutely certain that he knew what we would all be saying. But he said, can you put your hand up if you are ENIC out? And the guy next to me put his hand up. I was in the front, and the guy next to me looked round, realised that there was only one other hand up in the room. And then he said, and that you don't mind who buys the club if ENIC leave. And both hands went down. So while it's easy to get the impression that everybody feels a certain way, there's often a lot of nuance. So we take evidence from a lot of different ways, and we hope that we get it about right. We won't always get it right, but we do our best, because we actually think it really matters who owns the club. We want a much bigger focus on football, but we also want someone who leads with integrity, and that there are no sort of human rights abuses and all of that sort of where does the money come from type of question. Obviously, we've got a little bit of a thing at the moment with the Lewis family that no longer have a material interest in the club, but the rest of the Lewis family now, I think we're all going in the right direction, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, one of the other things actually that's interesting about the work that I've been doing with the trust is around with the Football Supporters Association, where you see how some of the other groups, trusts, or whatever they call themselves, the interaction they have with their clubs and where they get to. And sometimes you sit there and think, actually, you know what, we have our problems with Spurs, but imagine being at some of these other clubs. I'm not going to name them, but some of them being in London, and you get a really good sense of some of the clubs which have very little, if any, engagement with their fans. Look, some of them are good, and I think Spurs could certainly learn a lesson from some of the clubs in other clubs in the Premier League. But some of them are in a really bad situation in terms of fan engagement. They just don't seem to care in any way. And from everything that I've seen, I don't think that's the truth. Whether I don't think that's truth at Spurs. Whether they can or do make some of the changes and take on board some of the things that we ask them to is definitely a debatable question. But I think that they do listen, but it's just whether they act on that. And I think at some of the other clubs they're just not listening at all.
Okay, thank you. And Andy, sticking with you, before we move away from the whole kind of social media thing, I've got one more question, and that is, do you think social media makes the job of the Supporters Trust harder or easier? Because I'm thinking, does it make it harder in terms of the pressure, and you've got maybe more extreme voices? And I think Rachel's really right. It's not spoken about enough in terms of, if someone thinks the Supporters Trust has done a good job, they know if they put it, then they're going to get people have a go at them. Maybe it's not the trend, or it's not as popular, so they're very careful what to say. So I feel like just looking through social media in the past, there's that pressure from there. But also, does it make it easier to maybe get that message across of your vision and what you want to do and what you have done so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it there. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? And we do use social media to promote what we're doing. We could probably do it better, but all of us are unpaid volunteers, so there's a practical aspect to that. But I'm probably speaking for myself as well. As much as the trust, social media is a very polarizing place, and I think negative voices tend to be amplified further. Now, I'm not saying that they're not right sometimes, and criticism is always something that people should take on board if it's valid. But I think the way that sort of social media discourse, especially around football, kind of builds is around negative dissenting voices. And sometimes you're just doing an okay job and not a brilliant job, or a campaign maybe just okay and not amazing. But I don't think everything always has to be the best out there or the worst out there. And I think sometimes social media just polarized you to one aspect or the other. And look, it's easier to make negative comments, I think, to see something I don't like, that I'm going to go in on it, than to say, actually, when the tide's going the other way, to say, no, actually, I think this is a good.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that if you're as passionate about fan engagement and making things better for Spurs fans as we are, and get involved, because that, I mean, one of the people who joined us recently, I would say that he probably didn't think we were doing that great a job in some areas. And he has, A, really had his eyes open, but B, he's also brought us some great ideas. And you need that. We want people to join us as a member. You can do that by just going on our website, thsdofficial.com. But also, we want people to join the board, and we really, as Andy said, we really need some younger people who've got the IT skills and who can do some really important work for us with us. That I mean, I can make a PowerPoint, and I can just about access a podcast, but we need people who've got really up to date skills. Media skills would be great as well. So do think about it. And it's, as you said, it's easy to shout from the side, but get involved. Come and join in.
Good stuff. Thank you, Rachel. And I will stick with you if you don't mind. And you have touched on it, but I was going to ask about how you engage with supporters. You spoke about surveys in particular. What other ways do you speak about you want the club to communicate more with fans? Personally, as a fan myself, season ticket holder, I feel the same, that there's been a lack of transparency, communication, honesty, you name it, which you're now starting to see a bit more. So from the supporters trust, I mean, could there be even more maybe communication, and what do you make of what you've got with the fans in terms of engagement so far?
Yeah, so I mean, as a trust, we also we have a monthly newsletter, and all our full members get that email to them, so we can be sort of telling them everything that's going on about all the different meetings that we have, and it's got a lot of insight in there that people find useful, and ways that they can get involved. We also have lots of face-to-face, well, not lots, but we have about 3 or 4 face-to-face events which people find really interesting, and it's also just lovely being in a room with other Spurs fans, over they're normally at a pub, and it's a really good sort of social evening where we can hear what people think. But we really are welcoming of the ideas that we've been able to work on with the club. So, for example, it was about 2 weeks ago, I went to the stadium to meet it was an inaugural meeting of a young advisory panel that the club have set up under their fan engagement standard. And I was a head teacher before I retired, actually. So I absolutely love working with young people. And I met with them, and my remit was to tell them about the fan engagement and the way that it works at the club. And so I made a little presentation of my first trip to the stadium when I was black and white photo, and why I was there, and then but also that now it's my daughter and my granddaughter. So Spurs, the love affair with Spurs is a multi-generational thing, and I told them a bit about fan engagement, but it was far more important to me to listen to them. And some of the things that they came up with and that they were saying was, really moving. And, this was a 14-year-old girl who said, because they were talking about who their favourite players were and things, but they were saying, but, players will come and go and managers will come and go, but the fans will always be there. So you should be kind to them. And I thought, oh my gosh, join the trust, in 4 years' time, come and get involved. Another young man said to me that, because we were looking out at the stadium bowl, and he said, that's where I go, pointing to the south stand, but my dad has to pay an adult price for me because we can't get junior tickets there, and we can't get concessions like that if we go on the ticket exchange. And I said, I know, and this is completely wrong, isn't it? And we need to, this is one of the things that we really need to work on, and you'll see that that's featured in our campaign. But I think well done to the club for setting these things up, but we need to know that they're really listening and that they are going to act on the words of wisdom coming from our young supporters.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I want to move in now to your campaign. You've got campaign to improve the atmosphere, the stadium, called Feel Our Home and Find Our Voice. I mean, let's start with you, Andy. For you, do you think the atmosphere, firstly, is linked to like the poor home form? Because I just think they go hand in hand with each other. If the players haven't got energy from the crowd to feed off, they struggle. But at the same time, the fans are going there. Maybe they're good at the start, get behind the team, and then boom, we start slowly, or we concede, and they're like, oh, here we go again. It just feels like a never-ending cycle. So before we get into your campaign, how important do you think it is that the atmosphere is at the highest possible standard?
Yeah, I mean, look, definitely, and I think these things are linked. It's not just one thing that means that we have like a worse atmosphere or a poor atmosphere, because as we see it in certain games, it's up there and banging. And we know that if we're doing well when Arsenal come to town or whoever. I mean, Chelsea for the first couple of minutes was probably all right, and then died after that. But the stadium is capable of doing that. But for the atmosphere to be there, the stadium needs to be full for a start. I think we need to be attracting the right kind of supporters, younger supporters as well, because younger supporters are more likely to sing. They're passionate about their club. They're probably not as jaded by, having seen us not beat Chelsea for, however many years. And, I just bring with them an energy that I think sometimes is harder to get from, older supporters. I see that with my, nephew or my kids when I take them to Spurs games. Is they're not interested in what happened last week when we, went down and lost somewhere. They're taking into account that day and the atmosphere there. And I think, the atmosphere is so critical to like engaging people going forward that, whether it's the ticketing prices, and not being able to get tickets, whether it's not being able to sit together with family and friends, which we know is a problem, whether it's like, sort of unsociable kickoff times, whatever it is, there's lots of things out there which are not helping create an atmosphere for games. I think in the Europa League a bit last year, where pricing was more sensible, we actually did see, in the past in Europa League or Conference League, the stadium has been dead. Anyone who's gone to those games would know that. But last season, pricing was sensible. We looked like we were taking it seriously, and suddenly, actually, we got some really good atmosphere. And certainly once we got to the knockout, I think was it Frankfurt at home was a good atmosphere. Bodo at home, we blew them away really with the atmosphere. And, who would have expected us to have a great atmosphere home to Bodo? But, I think we scored, did we score twice early? Or we certainly scored, early against them and I think it does impact. You see the players, they're all young men out there. And I think when they're getting, booed or hissed for like, a bad touch or a bad decision, I think it does impact on them. And, managers always say it. And I've always thought it was a bit of lip service, them just saying that to get fans on side. But having seen the way that the team performs, certainly that Poch era, when the crowd was always up for it, and that team tried things, and it got things wrong, but it was always kept trying things. And I think that was partly because the support of the crowd meant that they knew that they could try something. If it didn't come off, they could go again. And I think we're in a bit of that stage where we've got a lot of young players, and I think the pressure builds on them when, it's 62,000, or even if it's a slightly reduced attendance, there's still like 50 odd thousand there, and that's a lot of people getting on your back when you have a bad touch or make a bad decision. So I think the atmosphere is critical, really important.
Totally agree with you. Thank you, Andy. Rachel, let's talk about your campaign then, which I think we'll all agree here is critically important. We all want to improve the atmosphere and over time improve results. I just think they go hand in hand. So Rachel, talk to us about your campaign.
Yeah, well, the campaign is to improve the atmosphere, but this is a long-term impact that we're wanting. So it's not just about, this season, encouraging the team to win. Of course, that is what we want to do, but we want to build regular match-going habits for our young supporters. And so that basically works on the the acknowledgement that an empty seat is a silent seat. So, for example, the Copenhagen game, there were about 11,000 empty seats, empty and silent seats. So you've already got an uphill battle, and all the light shows in the world are not going to continue the impact after about minute 5. They're very lovely. We all enjoy them, I'm sure, but ultimately we want to see a homegrown organic atmosphere. We work with Return of the Shelf, and sort of their goals, we're very aligned, but we want to see a younger crowd, and that we think there are several ways of doing that, and one of them is to make the young adult category, which is currently age 18 to 21, we want it to be extended to 25. And the reason for that is because, generally speaking, people's parents pay for them while they're still at school. Because we know that Spurs is a family thing, generally speaking. All the young people I spoke to were Spurs fans because their family are. So we know that come around 18, you're going to be going to university. That isn't cheap, or college. You've got fees to pay. And then when it gets to 21 and suddenly you're expected to pay an adult rate, that's just the point when you've got to start paying your fees back. You've got to start paying rent if you've moved out from home. And actually, there are so many other demands on your money that's the moment when you start to think, actually, something's got to give. And much as it breaks my heart, I don't think I can afford to come to Spurs, or I can only afford to come, once or twice a season. And then your life habits change and other things take over. And it might be 10 years or so before you think, oh, let's go for a season ticket. So we think that if you extend it to 25, it actually makes business sense, because your crowd is sort of captured. They've got it by that point. We can't possibly give up. But also it means that there's much more young voices. It was very noticeable when you look at the crowd, even in Bilbao, how old the crowd is when you compare it to images of when I first started going. It's a lot older. So one of the things is about extending that. But we also just think all midweek cup games should be really affordable. Fill the stadium, make your money on souvenirs, on food and beverage and everything else. You're already paying the staff, the stewards, the catering outlets. Fill it and make the noise, and it does pay off, but in a different way. So that's really important. And I
was going to say, Rachel, right? I was just going to jump in and say, and the South Stand is really critical for that. I think, I sit in the West Upper. I go with my dad, sit in the West Upper. There's no expectation the West Upper is ever going to create the atmosphere at Spurs, and I'd probably say the same for the East Upper when I've gone there. And the North Stand, there's some noise from there, but the South Stand, that is the engine that is going to drive the atmosphere, and that is where we need to get that next generation of supporters in, bouncing up and down when we score a goal. And it may not be the most important goal, but it could be the first goal they ever see at Spurs. I remember the first goal that I watched at Spurs, and that's an incredible moment. And you need to be in those supporters need to be in the South Stand experiencing that, and then that atmosphere will just drive on from there. So I think, and that's what that stand was designed for. It was designed for 18,000 bouncing fans, just like the Dortmund yellow wall. That's what it was about, and I think part of that is A, making sure it's full, but B, making sure that we've got supporters in there who do want to be the ones bouncing around and singing, as well, which, as much as I'd like to say that's me, sometimes it's me in Bilbao, but generally, I'm sitting there with the cucumber sandwich eaters in the West Stand. So, it needs to be different kind of people. I think that's what we're saying.
Yeah. So, and to achieve that, we are asking the club to put concessions in all of the South Stand, so that children and young adults can get concessions for every single game throughout the South Stand. So, that's a big change from what it's like at the moment. But we absolutely are committed to that. We believe it's really important and that it will pay off. We also want the club to give to enable young adults to get tickets on the ticket exchange at concession rates. They say that there's difficulties with children getting them because of safeguarding issues, that you need to be able to sit by your parent. Still not convinced that that's a reason not to give concessions, I have to say, but certainly there's no excuse for not enabling young adults to do that. And then also, and this was an idea that came from the FAB, actually, from Paul Pavlou, who's the representative for official supporters clubs in the UK. But we completely endorse this one, is that all season ticket holders, when they put their ticket on the exchange, if they can't come to a game, should be able to select a box to say, I don't mind if my seat gets sold to a concession. If they qualify for a concession, I am happy for my seat to go at the concession rate and I'll take the hit. Because actually, lots of us would rather, let's say you can't come to Brentford, we'd rather sell the seat, get a bit of money, know that there's someone young and excited sitting in your seat, than it going empty, which is what it will be, because it's on general sale and guest sale now.
That's a very vital point. A ticket in is something that really frustrates the fans. It continues to anyway. But Rachel, I will stick with you. I mean, it sounds like the focus is about mainly anyway young people. So would that be fair to say? But also, senior concessions, we know, were scrapped by the club, not the only club to do so. I mean, that's just shocking, isn't it? Because that's, in my opinion, that's exploiting and ultimately punishing loyalty.
Oh, absolutely. So we see them as slightly different issues. We are absolutely working on both. In terms of atmosphere, we want to pack the South Stand with young people. So, for example, the last TIFO, that THFC flags spend 2 days putting them out, all those things, onto all those seats. It's a massive undertaking by volunteers and club staff. There were loads of empty seats at the top. So there were going to be gaps in the TIFO. It was utterly ridiculous. Fill it. But of course we are working and have worked very hard on the senior concessions. Now, just to be clear, they haven't actually scrapped senior concessions, but the situation was that basically if you'd got a senior concession and you sat in a senior concession area, and you'd got the concession, they wouldn't take it away from you. So they were still that. And there were a lot of people in the stadium, a lot more as a percentage than there were at White Hart Lane, because it's an ageing population. But they pulled up the drawbridge basically and said, no more. And those of you that have got one, your discount of 50% is going to be phased over the next 5 years down to 25%. So that meant that basically, while everyone else had a price freeze, seniors were paying 5% more the last 2 years, and they will do again for the next 3. What we've, obviously all of this, I'm just reeling it off, but it's awful. And it's such a slap in the face, really, for people who have been through thick and thin. And we got an amazing letter in our inbox couple of days ago, actually, from someone who was relaying the things they've been to. They've supported the club. They're in their 60s. They've been at Seville when the police waded in and beat them, everybody randomly with a baton. They've been here, there, and everywhere through thick and thin, and then they get to the goal of getting to the right age, ready for their concession, and it gets pulled away from them. And they've given up their season ticket. They just said, I can't afford it. It's just absolutely outrageous, and it's very distressing. What the club have conceded, though, is that now they've put a cap on, and it's basically 1 in, 1 out within the agreed concession areas. it's still got to be absolutely finalised how that works. But it is a shift. We've managed to get them to move a bit in that, we've actually got far more than that lot down the road. And we will protect that. But as always, it's about the transparency and actually seeing the numbers and, really having to be on top of that and making sure that they really do that. Obviously, we would like everybody that qualifies for one to get one. But let's get this in first, and then we'll fight the next battle.
Steps, isn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you, Rachel. Andy, I mean, Rachel did mention it earlier in terms of the club and the history and statues. I mean, do you think the club could and should do more to make the stadium what I call myself more Tottenham? It's like embracing and recognising the history, because I just think to myself when I go on match day, so I'm a season ticket holder, and I think, what if I didn't follow football, or I wasn't as interested? Would you know it was particularly Tottenham's? And I thought to myself, apart from the name and a couple of maybe little things, you certainly wouldn't know any more by the club shop, for example, on the outside. And a lot of people feel that like a lot more could have been done, to make it kind of home. And I just think it's not a fortress, is it, at the moment? That's what we want it to be. And I think it can't be a fortress if you don't recognise the past and try and make it yours. So should the club be doing more? And what does that look like for you? Is it, naming rights? Is it, statues? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, when they were designing that stadium, they were designing a multi-purpose entertainment venue. I think we all recognise that. And yes, the core of it was the football club, but it was designed to accommodate lots of other things. We've seen all those over the past few years going there. And look, those are very successful for the club. We should see the benefit of that in terms of, spend on the first team or whatever. And there's definitely an argument out there. But I think when the club, embarked on that path, they probably had a thought that if we make this, or at the time, if we make this too, football fan and football dominated, it's going to be difficult then to maybe, encourage the other people to come to all these other events and rebrand the stadium as they effectively do for each of these different events to whether it's boxing, concerts, whatever, NFL. So I think they definitely need to do more. We do need to see statues out there. We've got that one mural of Ledley, sort of down the high road there, but you kind of miss it if you didn't walk past it. We have the, the graphics on the outside of the stadium, but, we don't have a museum, and this is something that the trust has continually said. We said it in our meeting with Vinay the other week, that we feel strongly the club should have a museum. I remember a few years ago going to Ajax Museum, which is incredible, and really spoke volumes about the history of that club. And we've got every bit of the history of a club like Ajax or any other club around. We've won trophies, we've got internationals, we've got everything to talk about. We've stayed in the same place for our entire history as well, which is also a very important point. So I think the club does need to do more. We heard, again, a bit like I said right at the beginning, we heard positive noises around statues and murals. I think, concern about who you put there to get the right person. Do you go right back to the beginning and recognise those people, or do you get Sonny's or, more recent players or managers up there? But I think, the club does need to do more. And I do think we need to make, that stadium sort of central to the history of the club in the way that Tottenham Hotspur is critical to the area Tottenham as well. I don't think there's very many places or very many clubs out there that are so synonymous with the local area. You mentioned Tottenham to anyone. Tottenham is, a big area, lots of people live there, and everyone immediately thinks of the football club. And, you don't get that in many other places. So I think we do need to do more. I think we need to connect the club to the community as well. We need more murals. I think Liverpool have got 20 or 30 murals around, Liverpool for their players. Why couldn't we have that around Tottenham? There's plenty of blank walls that definitely could do with a bit of a paint job, and recognising some of our players. And I think these are nice things for everyone, not just for hardcore Spurs fans or season ticket holders. Walking down the high road and seeing those things, I think will brighten up some of the areas. So yeah, I think we could do a lot more. I think the club could do a lot more. We mention it, we talk to the club about that, but I think fans do want to see more.
Thank you very much, Andy. And before we wrap up, I've got one last question, and I'm going to give to you, Rachel. And that is, how would you like my listeners and viewers today to get involved? How can they contribute and find out even more about what the Trust is doing?
Oh, that's a great question. I hope
that's a good assist. A good assist, isn't it?
Really? I really hope that some of your listeners will want to get involved. You would be so welcome. Obviously, we'd love you to come and join the Trust. And as I said before, it's www.thstofficial.com/join, or just go on the homepage and it's very obvious. We'd love you to join and, give us your views, to, maybe volunteer with us or whatever. But also with our particular campaign, what we're looking for is people who would be willing and happy to share their story with us and with our social media. So basically, if you are a young person or you're responsible for a young person, and some of the things that we've talked about would really help. So, for example, extending where you can get concessions, extending the age, and all of the ideas that we've talked about. If you think that would help, or if you think there's some other ideas too, perhaps you would write into us, and we've got a Google Doc. There's a link to it that we'll put on our tweet when we retweet this podcast. And that would be somewhere that you could write a short sort of synopsis of who you are and what your situation is, and put a little photo, particularly preferably in a Spurs shirt, or at the stadium, or however you'd like it to go on social media. And we want to sort of really ramp it up as we build to our next MOU, Memorandum of Understanding meeting with the club, with the next fan advisory board meeting, where it will be discussed with Peter Charrington as well as Vinay Venkatesha, and also, just getting it out there, because the press are interested. They really think it's a good campaign, and they've really got behind it. So we love people to come and give us, really just come and get involved.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rachel, and appreciate you joining me today. And also, Andy, thank you very much for coming on. Really do appreciate both of your time. If you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're listening via audio and a podcast platform, please drop us a follow and a 5-star review. And don't forget to get involved, as Rachel said there. But one thing's last, a massive come on, you Spurs.
Come on, Spurs.